Welcome, everyone. I would like to introduce the first panel and hand the floor over to Marc-Henri Desroches, a planning committee member and facilitator of the first session on the philosophy of mind. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Gabor. Thank you very much to all the organizers and the faculty and the four speakers and every one of you here in Dharamsala and everyone online everywhere. So this is a great joy to be here. I'm Marc-Henri Desroches. I'm associate professor in Buddhist philosophy in Kyoto University, Japan. And this session will be about minds in the plural. So we're going to discuss the different forms of minds, the living minds, human minds, and also the artificial minds or artificial intelligence systems. And in this way, we'll talk very much about philosophy of mind or philosophy of AI, and we'll explore from this perspective the big problems. The mind-body problem. Are the mind and body two different things, or one? If they are two, how are they related? There is also the mind-mind problem, how artificial intelligence and human intelligence are related. And there is, of course, the hard problem of consciousness, how to explain the emergence of conscious experience in the first place. And could AI one day become conscious? So those are the different questions we will explore. We have four speakers that will cover various fields from AI science to Western philosophy, special attention to phenomenology and embodied cognition. Of course, as we are here in Dharamsala, Buddhist philosophy, with special consideration of Indian Buddhist classics. So we are surrounded by all those panditas and as they are interpreted in the Tibetan tradition. So our first speaker, Murray Shanahan, Emeritus Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the Imperial College of London and Principal Scientist of Google DeepMind, will present his reflections on the various possible forms of consciousness. And to do so, he will draw upon both Western and Buddhist philosophies, especially Wittgenstein and Nagarjuna, to challenge mind-body dualism that, according to him, may prevent us from understanding the wider space of possible minds, as he used to say. So the key idea will be to reconsider what is our philosophical language when we talk about consciousness. Then Professor Sean Gallagher, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Memphis and at the University of Wollongong, Australia, will concentrate on the question of what kind of intelligence AI systems, plural, have and whether they qualify as minds. As he will argue, for classic cognitivist approaches, minds are nothing other than computational systems, and human brains are more or less computational machines. AI systems are in this respect similar to human minds, but this will be contrasted with the embodied and active approaches of cognition that offer a different conception of the mind, a conception that we may call, if you agree, organic. Then I will personally summarize some Buddhist perspectives on the nature, functions, and trainability of the mind, and especially I'll focus on phenomenal consciousness, what it is to be aware, what it is like to feel, and what is the relevance of that for the age of AI. And I will also dive deeper into some Tibetan Buddhist notions of the deepest level of the mind in connection with the wind. So we'll be talking about mind and wind, so to speak, and in the end to envision an ecology of minds. And ultimately, we'll be very fortunate to hear from His Eminence Kangse Rinpoche, who is an accomplished scholar, practitioner, and a distinguished spiritual leader in the Tibetan tradition. And we, among many responsibilities, presently serves as the vice abbot of Gyuto Monastery. So in the session of our dialogue, His Eminence Kangse Rinpoche will provide his scholarly insight and contemplative experience to reconsider this current scientific and philosophical issues regarding natural and artificial minds. So after the four faculty statements, there will be a reflective pause, an embodied pause, and we'll have a panel discussion and then a discussion with the floor. So now I will pass the baton to Professor Shanahan. So Murray, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Murray Shanahan, and I'm Emeritus Professor of AI at Imperial College London and part-time research scientist at Google. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me. And I'm really looking forward to the whole program. So could I have my presentation, please? Thank you. Okay, so we're all here to talk about artificial intelligence, and as Gabor emphasized, there are many different kinds of AI. And the whole term is a contested term, as we'll hear a bit later in the meeting. And he warned us not to think that AI is all ChatGPT, but nevertheless, I'm going to be talking about chatbots. And in particular, the whole experience of interacting with today's chatbots is very compelling. And to the point where some users even start to feel that there's some kind of presence at the other end of the conversation, as if they're talking with another person. And that's led people to ask whether it may be possible that the AI is conscious. It's led to that kind of question. And that in turn has led Western philosophers to also start to take that question a lot more seriously. Perhaps AI consciousness is possible today or perhaps in the near future. But my view is that dualistic assumptions are prevalent on every side of this debate. And so I'm not going to answer the question of whether AI is conscious or not, or could be conscious or not, but rather I'm going to question the terms of the debate, and in particular the dualistic underpinnings of the debate as it is today. And there are philosophical resources for deconstructing these dualistic intuitions and assumptions, both from 20th century philosophy, and I'm particularly thinking of Wittgenstein, and also much older Buddhist philosophy in the Madhyamaka tradition, originating with Nagarjuna. Sorry, we somehow leapt forward. Okay, so first of all, a few words about dualism. So in the West, René Descartes is often credited or blamed with having inaugurated dualism and dualistic thinking. And his method of doubt, which culminates with the famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," he casts into doubt everything in the external world and ends up with just the thinking subject, which he cannot doubt the existence of. And that sort of immediately divides the subjective from the objective, the inner from the outer, and the private sort of sphere of the experiential from the outer public world. And that division, that dualistic division, continues to haunt the philosophy of mind today. And here's a quote from Descartes. So on the one hand, I have a clear and distinct idea of myself, insofar as I am simply a thinking, non-extended thing. And on the other hand, I have a distinct idea of body, and that includes bodies in the outside world, physical things, insofar as this is simply an extended, non-thinking thing. And in the modern day, we have the hard problem, which was alluded to by Jinpa, I think, or by Gabor, which the philosopher Dave Chalmers articulates in this sort of way. So how can we explain why there is something it is like to entertain a mental image or to experience or an emotion or to have any other kind of experience? How can we explain it? Why should, in terms of the physical world, in terms of physics, why should physical processing give rise to a rich inner life at all? And this, as I see, is again a question that is sort of has dualistic underpinnings in the way the question is framed. Now, when we think about AI, and indeed when we think about other animals, particularly more exotic animals like an octopus, then that makes this whole problem even worse. The whole dualistic problem is even worse. And I'm interested in the space of possible minds, or the space of sentient beings, if you like to use a more Buddhist term, which includes not only humans, but also other animals like bats and cats and octopuses and macaques, but possibly extraterrestrial life that we don't know about, and potential forms of artificial intelligence. So that leads us to this question: could future AI systems be conscious? And the whole dualism that I alluded to earlier on, that problem, the problem of sort of splitting the reality into two, and then having the problem of rejoining those two parts back together again, is made even worse by thinking about these exotic forms of consciousness, or exotic forms of being. And here's the philosopher Thomas Nagel on this issue. So he says, from the perspective of one type of being, the subjective features of the mental states of a very different type of being are not accessible either through subjective imagination or through the kind of objective representation that captures the physical world. So he thinks that the states of very exotic beings are completely, in principle, unknowable. They're not there, and that again is a dualistic characterization of the issue. So we can think of it a little bit in terms of this sort of diagram. This is, you think about the way Nagel just characterized things. So it's as if I have in the Cartesian way of thinking about things. So it's as if I'm at the middle of this sort of concentric sphere of things. And then we have, I understand myself perfectly, supposedly. I don't, but there I am at the middle. And then humans and similar, well, we sort of understand each other and each other's consciousness and experience, pretty well because we're fellow human beings. The more unfamiliar our fellow human beings are, the less similar they are to us, the less we sort of understand them, and the less access we perhaps have to their conscious experience. And as we go out, we find other animals like, say, cats and dogs, or chimpanzees are pretty similar in very, very many ways. Even the macaques and grey langurs that we see in Dharamsala, fairly similar. But when we get to things like octopuses, they're really pretty strange. They're quite exotic forms of being. So how do we understand them? And then if we imagine further out, there might be forms of consciousness and mind that we really have much less access to their to their experience. And so one way of this is sort of Nagel and other people's way of thinking about these concentric circles, is that the further from the center you go, the less we can possibly know, the less access we have to this realm of subjective experience. And then when we get to the outer sort of rim of this stuff, there may be forms of being who have experience, but it's completely inaccessible to us. And now I think that whole way of thinking is a dualistic way of thinking, and I'm going to give you a different way of thinking about that. And the one way to deconstruct this form of dualism, I think we have resources from both Wittgenstein, 20th century Western philosopher, and from Nagarjuna, much older philosophy, the Madhyamaka school. And it's constructive or instructive to compare the two philosophers. So Wittgenstein, he made great use of reasoned argument, and for those who know, I'm thinking of the later Wittgenstein, not the Wittgenstein of the Tractatus. He used reasoned argument to undermine his interlocutor's metaphysical presuppositions, and not to establish fresh conclusions, but it's a deconstructive exercise. And his themes are things like representational conceptions of meaning and the privacy of the subjective. And his aim is to dispel philosophical confusion, or in his own words, to show the fly the way out of the fly bottle. Now, what about Nagarjuna? Well, of course, I'm not anywhere near as much of an expert as many of my friends in the room, but to my mind, it seems to me that Nagarjuna also uses reasoned argument to undermine his opponent's metaphysical presuppositions and not to establish fresh conclusions. Slightly different set of themes: inherent existence and emptiness, shunyata, conventional versus ultimate truth. I think we have analogues of that in the thinking of Wittgenstein, and dualities, including the subject-object distinction. And the aim to dispel philosophical confusion, but of course also the liberation from suffering. And here's a quote from Wittgenstein, which I think is a absolutely wonderful and important quote. So from the so-called private language remarks. So he says, because his interlocutor says, you keep on undermining this notion of sensation in itself, and saying it's a nothing. So he comes back and says, sensation itself is not a something, but not a nothing either. The conclusion was only that a nothing would serve just as well as a something about which nothing could be said, which is a beautiful paradoxical expression, much like a Zen koan, I think. And I think we can constructively compare his thinking with Nagarjuna, and I have a couple of quotes from the Mula Madhyaka Karika. I hope I got that pronunciation approximately correct there, which I think is worth comparing, is worth doing a sort of comparative exercise. Okay, so let me just go back to this this diagram here. So now what I'm going to suggest is that rather than thinking of this diagram in terms of as we move further from the center outwards, it's not that there are sort of a whole realm of experience that becomes increasingly inaccessible to us, but rather that the language of consciousness as we move outwards becomes less and less applicable. So it's a different way of thinking. The language of consciousness becomes less and less applicable. So we get to a point where at the outer edges, the language of consciousness simply isn't applicable at all. The question, is it conscious or is it not conscious? It has dualistic presuppositions. But the question, can we apply the language of consciousness, a much more Wittgensteinian way of thinking of it? And as we move from the familiar and the humans out to slightly unfamiliar things, octopuses say, then maybe we have to adapt the language of consciousness. Maybe the language of consciousness, and by the language of consciousness, I think all the kind of cluster of words we use and concepts we use around that idea. We have to adapt it. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, then maybe the language of consciousness will be inapplicable, or maybe we'll just have to adapt and bend it to new kinds of forms. So I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Murray. Very interesting, and we look forward to discuss this space of possible minds together soon. And now I'll turn to the next speaker, Professor Gallagher.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Sean Gallagher. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Memphis in the United States. And I'd like to, first of all, thank the organizers of this conference for inviting me. It's both an honor and a pleasure to be here in Dharamsala. This is my second time in Dharamsala. And I'm looking forward to our dialogue and hope that it goes very well. So I think I should start my 10 minutes. And I need, here it is. So I'm going to ask a philosophical question and start with this one. What do we mean by intelligence or mind or rationality? And here we can immediately think about artificial intelligence, and we can ask something like this. Is artificial intelligence more like an artificial flower? If we think of an artificial flower really isn't a flower. It's more of an illusion, like trying to pretend it's a flower, but it's not really a flower. Or is artificial intelligence more like artificial light, which we have around us? It's real light. It serves a purpose and serves a function as light. And I think most philosophers today would say artificial intelligence is more like artificial light in the sense that it's real intelligence, but it's not necessarily natural intelligence, and it's not necessarily human intelligence. So let's look at a few answers to this. Classic cognitive science would appeal perhaps to the Turing test, saying that, well, if it behaves or responds like a mind, then it is a mind. And the central point in classic cognitive science, I think, is that even a human mind is a computational system. It processes information, symbols. That's a better picture than a Cartesian substance. So to the extent that artificial intelligence is also processing information and symbols and so forth, then we have intelligence, real intelligence. So yes, artificial intelligence is genuine intelligence, even if it is not precisely human intelligence. I want to contrast that classic cognitivist view with embodied and enactive cognitive science, which questions whether we should think of the mind as a computational system. Brains are not really computers, and whether they're processing information or not, that's a question. And we should rather think of the mind in embodied terms. And we can introduce here what is a term in this whole discussion. It's sometimes referred to as 4E cognition. 4E cognition includes embodied cognition, embedded cognition, extended cognition, and inactive cognition. And each of these different approaches within the 4E family will highlight different issues. Embodied cognition would say, look, in order to have intelligence, you have to have a body. So let's put AI in a body. Let's put AI in a robot. That's not biological embodiment. It's a kind of robotiment. Artificial body. Even if it's not an animal body, still we might find that this robot is intelligent in some way. Embedded cognition, we find a positive answer here too. AI is becoming more and more integrated with social and cultural practices. Extended cognition, yes, again, insofar as AI employs language within which there is meaning, intentionality, and intelligence. And also, extended cognition highlights the use of tools and technologies, and to the extent that AI can control tools and other pieces of technology, then it would count as a kind of intelligence. Finally, the inactive cognition, which we've heard is associated with Francisco Varela. Even if not biologically self-producing or autopoietic, as Francisco would say, a system may have sensory motor contingency. We can build robots with sensory motor contingency aspects. It can be action-oriented. It can involve dynamical processing in machine learning and artificial neural networks. All of these features figure into the inactive definition of intelligence or minds. And so the inactive cognition would say something like, if a system is minded, if it can operate as a cognitive agent. So we have, even in 4E cognitive science, not a discounting of the claim that AI is a form of intelligence. It's a form of intelligence in the same way that we might think of artificial light as genuine light. But again, it's not necessarily human intelligence. But now, let's think of some limitations. And I want to put together a little bit of an argument that combines inactive thinking and robotics. Perhaps even before Francisco Varela, I sometimes think of Anaxagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher, as the first inactivist, at least in terms of what he says about our hands. Now, you might find it funny to start thinking about the mind in terms of your hands, but let's see how this goes. As quoted by Aristotle, Aristotle says, "It is the opinion of Anaxagoras that the possession of hands is the cause of humans, of all animals, being the most intelligent." Aristotle didn't fully agree with that, but he did think that hands and rationality were very closely linked. And he argued that touch was the most basic sense modality. We can think of how this connects with human intelligence. We can think of it developmentally. Touch is the first and the earliest in fetal development, the earliest sense modality to develop in fetal development. And we can think also in evolutionary terms with respect to hands, for example. In evolutionary terms, what if we do assume that the human brain evolves with the human body. That's an important idea. What if humans evolved without hands? That would mean that brains would be different. The idea of an active perception or perception of affordances, which means the perception of possibilities of acting in the environment, that would be different. Our intersubjective interactions with others, would also be very different. Tool development would be quite different and quite limited. And what we might call rationality or intelligence would be quite different. The importance of hands here, especially with respect to tools, but also with respect to interacting with other people, is quite important. Now let me just give you a research update, because it's been some time since 450 BCE, the time of Anaxagoras. Here we have, last month in September 2025, the leading roboticist, Rodney Brooks, who Francisco referred to in his work, explained why robots, even if they are built with humanoid hands, will not have functional dexterity sufficient for engaging in human-like action, and will lack the right sense of touch. His reasoning on this is quite complex, but in part it relates to the way that these great advances in LLMs, the language models, and the computer vision have depended on what he calls end-to-end learning. This is the neural network-based learning by exposure to huge amounts of common source data. Visual, we have lots of visual pictures to show these systems. They can learn from them. We have lots of language to give them, and they can learn from that. What about touch, though? And the idea here is that there is no data bank for touch. What would a data bank of touch look like, in fact? We might argue, well, maybe it's the world itself. Let's build a computer, give it the possibility of haptic exploration, and send it out into the environment. But the problem there is that haptic exploration already presupposes touch. It's not something the robot could learn just by tactile contact. Here is a quote from Rodney Brooks. "We do not have such a tradition for touch data. Touch for us, for now, is only the instantaneous touch we perceive firsthand, no pun intended. We as a species have not developed technologies to capture touch, to store touch, to transmit touch over distances and time, nor to replay it to either ourselves or other humans." Brooks further argues, like Aristotle, that touch and haptic embodiment are central to dexterity. He says, human dexterity relies on a rich sense of touch, and dexterity for humans involves more than just their hands. It often involves their elbows, fronts of their bodies, legs, and feet. This is an important fact, because it's not just about hands here. We're using hands as a kind of shorthand, so to speak. We want to add the argument from Anaxagoras and Varela and the enactivists and say that without human dexterity, or more generally without embodiment, you don't get human rationality or intelligence. As I say, this is shorthand for other issues that generalize to the body as a whole. And here I can only name and sort of indicate, but these are things we're going to be discussing throughout these few days. Affectivity, desire, emotion, pain, pleasure, autonomic processes, enteric gut processes, sexual processes. These are all aspects that shape our perception and cognition. Intersubjectivity, our relations with others, that's a very important topic. And then we've already heard, and we will hear more about consciousness now, which is required for a system to feel pain, to have genuine desires, to be curious, to have a feeling of satisfaction, to use language in such a way that it becomes transparent to meaning. So the bottom line here, AI, it's not human intelligence, but it's a different kind, maybe a handless form of intelligence. And I'll leave you with an open question from Jacques Rassat. Who, at this point, can determine the borders that this science, the science of information, will not be able to cross? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean, for this very interesting presentation and this open question in the end. So I will now start my own presentation that is titled Technology of Consciousness, Artificial Intelligence and Life Wisdom, and trying to, of course, contrast this notion of artificial intelligence with what I will call life wisdom. And by this, I mean the continuity, strong continuity thesis of life and mind, but especially I will explore it according to its Indian and Tibetan expressions in Buddhist sources. So to speak, the embodied cognition as it was understood in Buddhist text. So what I really hope, I'm very aware, and although this session is about minds, but for Buddhist philosophy of mind is not just a theoretical enterprise. It's highly practical. It's eminently practical. And we are very aware, all of us here and many people online, of the existential stakes that are connected to AI. And I hope that here together we can envision, and with this dialogue among Buddhist traditions and cognitive sciences, creative solutions to cope with the age of AI and maybe envision a contemplative turn of AI. I'd like to talk about Buddhist sources as offering technologies of consciousness, and we've been talking about superintelligence or artificial general intelligence, but there is also another aspect in the field of AI that used to be intelligence augmentation, and I will argue that Buddhism, and especially awakening, was an ancient model of intelligence augmentation that could be maybe offer some complementary insight, although it's a bit tricky, because awakening is also very much about removing and letting go of the ego, so to speak. So here's in 10 minutes only the different points I'd like to explore through the Buddhist ideas about the nature of mind and especially about phenomenal consciousness. And then I'll talk about mind and wind, and from this perspective I'll try to envision a viable ecology of natural and artificial intelligence, not at this point opposing them, but seeing some viable possible model. So nature of mind is the big question in the Tibetan traditions, and they lead this very important compendium. The mind, unlike physical things, is difficult to identify. Yet, if we train our mind, then in reliance on mindfulness, meta-awareness, heedfulness, and so on, we will attain both temporary and final happiness. For the Buddhist tradition, the root of suffering is that we ignore the nature of our minds. So that's not a small element. So knowing one's own mind is very much the definition of awakening. And those are the three qualities: emptiness, luminous clarity, and awareness. And those three phenomenal aspects are really at the core of Tibetan non-dual meditation traditions, as we will see. But we should not assume that Buddhism is actually varies in Buddhism to some extent a form of substance dualism. This quote is a bit complex, but what it is saying is that for Shantarakshita, who is actually also here, consciousness and matter are opposite. So for classical Mahayana Buddhist philosophy, consciousness does not emerge out of physical system. So that's just something to consider, but we will move to other perspectives that can allow us to envision the mind-body dualism in another way. But let's not assume everybody's saying the same thing. So what is also very important in the age of AI is to rethink that the knowledge of the mind in Buddhism is also practical ways to shape the mind. And Buddhist training is about the discipline of moral agency. And in the age of AI, that's becoming a hugely important issue. And it's also about, with shamatha meditation, the unification of the stream of consciousness, like shaping, structuring. We talk more about stream of consciousness rather than self. But then there's, of course, discernment, like not being identified with thoughts, ceilings, having this larger space in which experience can be seen, but we can explore this freedom or discover this freedom. That's at the core of the Buddhist knowledge of the mind. In order for the mind to know itself, there are two mental factors that are extraordinarily important: mindfulness and meta-awareness, but that they are not limited to what the Western tradition used to call introspection. This is covering it, but this is very much beyond it. So let's go to the core. And of course, to connect already with Sean's, we have the space of possible mind. So I will say that what the Buddhist tradition is doing is going deeper into the center, exploring, this me, or this experiencing the world itself. So of course, the ways of establishing mindfulness is very well known, but there are ways to really work with experience itself. And this is Nagarjuna's version of embodied cognition. He wrote, Lord, the Buddha taught mindfulness established in the body as a single path to progress. This hold fast and guard it well, for all the Dharma is destroyed by the loss of mindfulness. So really, minding the body is the core of the path to freedom according to the Buddhist tradition. And thus, I would say the mind-body problem is not only an unresolved metaphysical question, it's an existential gap that each one of us needs to bridge by deeply minding one's lived body. Then the capacity of minding the body allows, and this is really at the core of Buddhist soteriology, or the capacity to free the mind to be mindful of feelings, pleasure and pain, but before reacting. Or even if we react, we're aware of the reaction. And that's through the development of bodily awareness. And that's very much at the core of phenomenal consciousness. And I would say that the modern world can be seen, so to speak, abstract thinking, can be seen as a defense mechanism for not to feel. Because that's the issue. What makes the hard problem of consciousness so hard, and of course this is a little bit of a joke, is that being conscious entails the very hardship of experiencing or embracing painful feelings. So it's tempting, in order not to feel, to think or overthink or live in the head. But the Buddhist approach offers another way to feel and embracing the pain, but in a different way. And this is quite important because the point I will make here in reference to Michel Henry's phenomenology is that so in this book, Michel Henry traced back the self-destructive tendencies of our contemporary civilization into the Galilean rejection of subjectivity. The connection with AI here is that we think about existential risks of misaligned AI, for example. But this has to be, we have been the one who have developed those AI systems in the first place. So they can be the extension of our own self-destructive tendencies. So Henry interpreted this rejection of subjectivity as a sophisticated yet tragic attempt to escape the ordeals of sensibility and affectivity. And as he warned, the pain that is not fully experienced cannot become transformed and sublimated into the higher creations of culture. It becomes very, very destructive. It's transformed into anguish, and it's projected outward or inward. And for him, he would consider culture as a cultivation of life, of lived experience. So recently, Michel Bitbol has also expanded this interpretation to the age of AI. I will go quite quickly now. But what we have in the Tibetan tradition is the capacity with non-dual traditions to really cultivate this natural freedom by really exploring the very core phenomenal consciousness. And of course, we have this a symbol of Samantabhadra Buddha, which is a representation of naked awareness. So this, I'm just mentioning those perspectives, other perspectives. So the West has very much explored the possibility of trying to get away from phenomenal consciousness. But here in the Tibetan tradition, we have the exact opposite approach. And this is maybe what can enrich our dialogue today. But one more important point, even in those deepest meditative traditions that focuses on phenomenal consciousness itself or the nature of mind itself, they insist on bodily practice. And why? Because according to the tantric accounts of the nature of mind, or the deepest mind, the most subtle mind, it is said to be always inseparable from what they call the wind, or lung, or prana. So there is this beautiful idea of the indivisibility of mind and wind, lung sem ngo yerme. Or there is even the idea of the primordial body mind. Of course, this is the deepest mind, but this is, I'm mentioning those ideas to, following Murray, to expand the space of possible minds and to consider minds also by including this deeper dimension of the very center of your mandala of possible minds, so to speak. So this is the way of the Tibetan tradition. They explore the deepest vital energy of wind, and that serve to the emergence of what they call natural wisdom. And of course, I see as a Tibetologist, when I hear about artificial intelligence, I always have this concept of Rangjung Yeshe as a kind of alternative, so to speak, or other point of view. So just to conclude, how do we make sense of all those different ideas? So we have, according to the work of Yazan Gabriel, this notion of the tetratic relationship in which hopefully a deeper knowledge of contemplative practice could potentially play a vital role. So you have the conscious experience of the designer, the cognitive architecture of the machines, the conscious experience of the users, and then the larger society. But the point is that at the beginning, design, and at the end, use varies phenomenal consciousness. And this is maybe what we need to take into account in order to cultivate it in a way that is not destructive, and that is actually leading to more human flourishing. So this is my idea. And in the end, I will say that really facing the possibilities of self-destruction, we need to think how to realign our natural minds and then our artificial creations with what I will call, with His Holiness, universal responsibility. Or maybe thinking about it as a deeper intelligence of life and an alignment with a deeper intelligence in communion, so to speak, or in connection with all sentient beings. And of course, the hope is that by mindfully designing AI systems and integrating contemplative principles, techniques, and functions in a design, development, and deployment of AI systems, they could support human flourishing. But, and I advocate with this notion of mind-win non-dual, the continuity thesis of life and mind and life. And of course, even those beautiful tankas, they represent a deeper intelligence of life. And of course, I live in Kyoto, so for me, this connection with nature is to be cultivated. And this is what maybe with this, I would call a deeper intelligence of life, or heartfelt connection, or a green mindset, and I hope we could put such a green mindset at the heart of AI systems design. Thank you very much for your attention. So I now will change cap and come back to my role as a facilitator and invite now Kangsa Rinpoche, His Eminence Kangsa Rinpoche, to share his insights with us.
Good morning to all. My name is Kangsa Rinpoche. So we met yesterday, many of you, we met yesterday. And as I said yesterday, today I'm not prepared to talk. So I will just talk that what comes in the mind. So, but today's my topic will be I will talk about what I'm doing, the research about the mind. So I think that you cannot find that in the AI and in the ChatGPT. So from the Buddhist perspective, the mind, that definition of the mind, it is say that the clear and the understanding. So the mind have a very strong potential. So once you can change the mind, you can change the whole your body system. So past 3 years, I was doing the one research with the collaborating with one of the leading hospital in Taiwan. And I'm very happy and proud to say that I am the first Buddhist monk who are residing in the Tibetan monastery to apply the IRB and to get the IRB. So what I apply is that through the meditation, how you can change the body immune system. So what we did is we did the pilot test with the 12 people. I took the blood, we took the blood, did the test, then we asked to meditate for the 6 weeks. After 6 weeks later, again, we took the bloods. So I introduced then the 3 different types of the meditation. Now you might be very curious that what I introduced, what the meditation. So before that, let me tell you the one thing. Have you heard the term GMO? Genetically modified organism. Same thing that what I always tell that I introduce the meditation that GMM, genetically modified meditation. Because that I modified the little different type of the meditation from which mentioned in the Vajrayana. I'm not so sure you heard the term. The Vajrayana is the highest school in the Buddhism. So I introduced them modified the meditation, 3-step modification. So then I introduced they have to meditate daily the 40 to 50 minutes for the 6 weeks. After 6 weeks later, we found that in the pilot test that the really very amazing result changes in the body immune system. Now we got the IRB, Now we are going to do for the 150 peoples going the test. So this is the past 3 years. It took for a lot of times to get me the IRB, but finally we got it. And we already did the pilot test. Now we are going to do the master test. So here the point is that when you change the mind, so you can change a lot of things. Now here we have to understand the one very important thing is that we have to understand the definition of the mind. What is the definition of the mind? The second question comes, the mind have any potential or any ability to recognize itself? Did you get my point? So this is quite important. Then we can see that then we will see what the difference between the artificial intelligence and the actual intelligence. One time, one of my students sent me the message and asked me the one question. So I told her, just go check in the AI. She told me, Rinpoche, you are my AI. You are my actual intelligence, not artificial intelligence. So here we have to know that the difference between the mind and the AI. First, we have to know the definition of the mind, and any mind have any potential to realize or recognize itself. Some Buddhist perspective. Now, as I told you, the Buddhist perspective, what we see and what we found is that the mind have the very, very strong potential. And when you change your mind, it will not only change your brain, it can change your body immune system. That's the research what I'm doing. But I'm not so sure that I will fail or I will succeed in that research. I'm not so sure, but we are working on it. So later, 1 year later, I hope that I can tell you the results, what we found after 1 year. So now another thing is that as the mind, another thing is we have to understand that the mind is from the Buddhist perspective. It is when you talk about the mind, it's a very complicated, very complicated. Let me tell you the one example. It's just a story, okay? Don't take it seriously. There is one person came to see the master, and they told the master that, can you teach me the meditation? Master told that person, meditation is a very simple and very easy. Just go, sit, close your eye, think anything, whatever you want. Meditate, whatever you want, but don't think monkey. Don't think monkey, just sit there, think anything, whatever you want. The person went to the side of the room and sit there and close the eye. Then now you know what comes in his mind. That is the complexity of the mind. So that's why if you look at the Buddhists, they have the 4 different schools. I'm not so sure, have you heard that the Vaibhashik, Sutrantik, Chidamatra, Madhyamik. So when they come to explain about the mind, they have a lot of the different views about the minds. What are the different theories about the mind? Even when I ask you that about the mind have any potential to recognize itself, even if you look from the Prasangika view, the highest school of the view, a lot of different ways of explaining it. Where I come from is called monastery from the Saraja monastery, and we used to say that from the view of the Prasangika, mind can realize the mind. But I know that some of the monastery, they will not accept this point, but we can debate, okay? If you are interested to see the debate, we can debate. So that is the second point. Now what we have, most important thing is what we have to know about the consciousness. Now again, we have to know what is a consciousness and what is a mind. Now here comes the one very tricky is about the word. When you come to the Tibetan term, the namshe, and when you translate that in the English in the consciousness, it loses a lot of the meanings. Let me ask you the one question, very simple question. Do you believe or do you accept that a cell, body cell, have a consciousness? I used to ask this question a lot of people. Yes or what? Do you feel yes? Now, if you use the do self have a namshe Tibetan word, if you ask any of the Geshe-las and any of the Buddhists, the scholar, they will say no. This is very tricky point. Now, the second question, normally the cell can pass the message to the one cell to the another. It can pass the message and it pass the message back to the brain. Am I right? So now comes the one question. Can the brain or mind pass the message back to the cell? Reverse. Are you getting my point? That is my second research I'm going to do. From Buddhist perspective, very possible. Through the training the mind, you can pass the message back to the cell. So that's why right now I can't surely say, but I personally believe that with the meditations or with the changes of the mind, we can pass the message back from the mind to the cell. If you look at the cancer cell, normally it grows without any proper reason. Here's the one question. Through meditation or through training your mind, can you pass the message back to that cell not to grow? Are you getting my question? Yeah, that can be an answer. I don't have the answer, just a question. I raised the question. So now the first to understand the mind, it's a very tricky consciousness. And when you come to the Tibetan term called the namshe, it's when you translate a consciousness, it's lost a lot of the meanings. So mind, it translated as a sem. I think so. Am I right? I'm not very sure. So I'm not a translator. I'm very sorry. Maybe the sem. So these all what you really have to, when you now come for the artificial intelligence. Now these are sometimes that when you really understand the very perfectly from the Buddhist perspective, I think that you have to go to the term, Tibetan term, and understand and learn a little bit of the Tibetan term. Otherwise, if you learn from the translation, I think you will miss a lot of the meanings. So that is the general my thoughts to share. And at last, thank you so much for inviting me for this conference. And really, I'm not a philosopher. I'm just not a philosopher because I used to teach the philosophy so many years back in the Surya monastery. I'm the philosopher teacher, but I always tell myself that I'm not a philosopher because I always believe that the philosophy is very complicated. So there's a saying, when you have one doubt and ask the philosopher, he will clarify that doubt and he will put 2 new doubts in your mind. So that's the philosopher's job. I don't put any new doubts. I want to find the solutions. I want to bring some of the solutions of the benefits for the people. As I told you before, that research, what I'm doing, immune system, that research, actually, that's not because I'm so interested in that. I'm so desperate, so I'm doing it. As I shared yesterday's story, the one student bring me the 2 friends, they are friends, and the cancer, the last stage, doctor told there's no medicine for them. Only depends on their immune system. They asked me that whether I can do something for them. Really, as I told you, I cannot tell them that I will pray. I cannot tell them that's your karma. I really want to help them. But the very sad is that both of them died. But still, I'm finding some solution to help the more people like the cancer, the last stage, through the meditation, bring the more stronger immune system. So I'm doing it with the desperate. I'm doing it with the benefit. That's a motivation to benefit the people. Whether I success or not success, I don't care about it at all. So that's just the simple my story and what I'm doing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
For
Thank you.
our guests that are here in the room, we would like to turn the air conditioning back on, which means the lights are going to go off as we switch from generator power to the electric power. Please, going forward, just be aware that if the lights do go out, it is because of this switch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Rinpoche. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Murray. We'll have a 10-minute break, so we're free to move. But the idea of the committee was to use this time also as a reflective moment. So maybe pairing with somebody and sharing your main insights and then bringing back those questions or ideas to the room in 10 minutes. So I will say 10 past 10, if you agree, Gabor. And yeah, so looking forward, we'll have then the panel discussion and then taking this time to move and to discuss also deeply and trying to take the main message. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me start with a few questions to our speakers. And let me start with you, Mary. This will be a question about the space of possible minds. I think this is a wonderful expression. As we are here now in Dharamsala, which has this extraordinary culture, very rich, did you have any new ideas about the space of possible minds? Of course, the monkeys on the way.
Well,
we're meeting them regularly.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Actually, I think His Eminence has put monkeys in all of our minds now, because that certainly was the answer I had in mind, because you queued up this question before, and it was wonderful on the Kora walk to encounter all those monkeys. And there are two species. There's a macaque and the grey langur monkey, and I had a wonderful photo opportunity because a monk at one point was feeding the grey langur monkeys, and I asked if I could take some pictures. And it's a wonderful thing to see the interaction between the monkeys and the human monk, and that makes me when it comes to consciousness, I tend to think that the sort of, in a sense, the primal setting for us using words like consciousness is our being together in the world with others, and in an embodied way, in an embodied setting, and interacting with a shared world together. So that's the kind of primal setting in which we use words like consciousness. Certainly certainly when it's other human beings, but also when it's other animals, or it doesn't have to be a language using creature. But you cannot. It's through interacting with animals that you get this conviction that as Nagel would put it, that it's like something to be them, and you have this connection with their consciousness, with their being. And to my mind, that's a really, really important thing. Is being in the world with another creature is the primal case of using that word.
Thank you very much, Murray. And I want now to turn to Sean. And in your talk, you made an important distinction between the computational model of cognition and then the embodied and active model of cognition. And if this distinction is lost, what could be the risks? Because we are all concerned to some risks, right? So I wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about risks, but I do have a sense that that's another issue that has to do with the minds. Because one risk is that AI, unbeknownst to us, will change the way we think, will change our mind in some fashion. The way I think about this is in terms of the concept of transparency. So I think there are three different kinds of transparency involved in any technology, but this also very much applies to AI. A first kind of transparency is experiential transparency, the idea that we want to make our technologies, our computers, easy to use. So it's about ease of use, so that when we pick them up, we don't have to think about it, that we just do it. You've all run into the problem of software that doesn't work right and so forth. So that kind of transparency is important, and people really like it. Another kind of transparency is referred to as epistemic transparency. And that's the question of, how does the system actually work? And it might be important for us to understand how these systems actually work. It turns out that for most of us as users, we maybe have a vague idea of how they work. Maybe we don't understand how they work. And I'm told that even the engineers who design these systems don't fully understand how they work. So epistemic transparency, we're in a little bit of trouble there, perhaps. The third kind of transparency is where we start to think about what this technology might be doing to us. So I refer to this as hermeneutic transparency, where hermeneutic means associated with self-understanding. So Hermeneutic understanding is an attempt to ask, what is this technology actually doing to us? Is it changing our mind, changing the way we think, changing the way we reason? And that's where the risk, I think, comes in, that it could be doing that, and we might not even be aware that it's doing it. Yes. And these three transparencies are connected in the sense that if it's easy to use this technology, we might just fall into using it without really thinking and reflecting about what it might be doing to us. Yes. If we don't really understand the epistemic transparency, if we don't really understand how it works, that might be a difficulty in answering the question of what it's actually doing to us. So I think that question of what it could do to the mind is where we could locate the risk.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe Mary, you want to elaborate
Comment
on
on
that?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so on the epistemic transparency issue, so it certainly is true that on one level, of course, we understand how a trained, so we're thinking again about large language models like ChatGPT, so or the Gemini or Claude, any of these chatbots. So on a certain level, of course, we do understand how they work because they're computers, and we can trace at a fine grain, we can trace the computation. It's just a mechanical thing. And although there's a bit of randomness introduced, even the randomness is actually pseudo randomness. So we can trace that computation through in a very precisely. So that on one level, we know exactly how it works. But on another level, because it's been trained on a huge amount of data, and the actual construction of the thing is it's a very large neural network which is full of millions and millions of weights or parameters, and they've all been altered by the training process. And how you get a particular response to a particular query, or how it solves a particular task, the actual sort of an intuitive higher level explanation for how that works is really kind of lacking at the moment. So that's why there's a whole field called mechanistic interpretability, which is trying to understand how a trained neural network actually achieves the kind of high level tasks that it achieves. It's a sort of reverse engineering exercise.
Thank you very much, man. This is really important. And then I wanted maybe to ask Lin Potier, of course, the big question, it's a bit delicate, but what Buddhism will say about the possibility of AI becoming conscious, that's something that is being explored. It's a tricky question. Maybe our language about consciousness is not fully accurate, but what are some Buddhist ideas about this possibility? From Shantalakshita, conscious cannot arise out of matter, but who knows?
First of all, that when you ask from the Buddhist perspective, so this is the first we have to understand the definition of the consciousness. Yes. Because when you talk about a consciousness, if you go a little bit deep in the Buddhist philosophy, there are a lot of different kind of the consciousness, like a conceptual thought, a consciousness of direct perception. So you are talking about the which consciousness? First, we have to clarify it. Second thing is when you talk about consciousness, the nature of the consciousness, or as I mentioned, the definition of the consciousness is clear and annoying. So that means that it should have the potential to know the things. Yes. So when you come to the AI, so two things are missing. Two things. Like for my own experience, I asked the AI one time to create the picture, king and his general on the right side. Yeah. Always it create the left side. When I asked the AI to create the one photo of the king with the general, and the general on his right side, but the AI always it created the photo with the king with the general, but the general on the left side. So I told several times the AI, but could not understand it. Then I learned that AI could not understand the logic. It only understands the code. So that is the thing, that when you call the thought of the chain, base of the thought of chain, actually not a base of it's a base on the chain of the code. So mind have such a potential to understand it two way, to understand it through the logical reason, or understand it through what it perceives. So AI can understand through the logical reason or through its perception. It have that potential, then the AI can have the consciousness. But if I don't have that, then we cannot say that AI AI can have the consciousness. So that's why the up till now what I feel is that when you talk about the consciousness, mostly people get very confused with when put in Buddhist perspective. To understand the consciousness, first you have to understand the mind and mental factor.
Yes.
So there will be lots of the different of the mental factors. Even the consciousness, as I mentioned before, they will be the conceptual thought and the direct perception. From the conceptual thought can transform into the direct perception. For understand this very well, I think that you should read the textbook of the Dharmakirti. Dharmakirti was one of the greatest philosophers. I always tell that I'm the fan of the Dharmakirti. So you have to read his textbook. So then you will understand you will understand the consciousness from the Buddhist perspective very well.
Thank you very much. Maybe I have another question about that. What about the Tibetan translation for artificial intelligence? I think one of them is the Mi Sepe Liknu. So like literally it's like a intelligence capacity created by human beings. So I think that's quite interesting that even the term, and in Chinese also there is also this idea, it's like basically human-made intelligence capacity. So what about what is the translation that is used here in Dharamsala for artificial intelligence?
I don't know. I'm not translator.
Jinpa, do you know what is the...
He's in charge of Tibetan AI. I told that this is artificial intelligence.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So that's it. So that's what I was saying. Like, oh, you made it. Oh, wonderful. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. That Rindu is,
Yeah.
the same like the human intelligence.
Yes. But that's
Yeah.
very interesting that in the term itself, it's human-made.
Yes, human made. This as a definition that's first come from the Oxford Dictionary.
Okay.
Yeah. Then the artificial. I don't like the that is not exactly artificially.
Okay.
This is it naturally, but not the human intelligence.
Yeah.
Okay, then we call Rindu. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much. German, yeah.
So Geshe Möllam's choice of calling it human-made, Rignu,
Yes,
instead of artificial is because the Tibetan term for artificial can also have a pejorative negative connotation.
Yes.
So he wanted to avoid that to really make it explicit that something human created.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Michu, yeah.
And actually, the matche is also quite important term in some Mahamudra and like traditions, that actually the mind should be left untouched and so to reach this uncorrupted, so to speak, level of the mind. So that's also quite...
Yeah, so add the one more thing.
Yes, please.
Even when you look at the translation, from my own experience, so a lot of the Tibetan, the Buddhist terminology is translated from the Sanskrit.
Yes.
So like if you look at a term like a Atma, so Tibetan term, it will use goes Da. But if you look at when the Bhagavad Gita, when the Krishna was explaining about the Atma, it explained with the Atma the totally different qualities. And according to the ancient like a Bhagavad Gita and the ancient Hindu text, Atma and the self is very different. Yeah. If you look from the Hindu perspective, the Atma self is Atma, and it is not translated as a self. Self they will use as aham. Aham and the Atma is two different terms. Now, if you look at the Tibetan text, mostly they use one term called the Da.
Yes, that's true.
So if the Bhagavad Gita explain about the qualities of the Atma, not the Aham. So that's why when you come to have you heard the terms of selflessness, no? So selflessness, Dame, is the selfless. From that, they have translated the English, the selflessness, and the Chinese, the Wu Trang. So that's why these are sometimes what I feel is sometimes when you have to learn it like a Da or the Atma self, I think that you have to go to the source, that you will learn much better. So same thing like that, if you don't go for the source, then you will not understand, you will miss a lot. So that's why when you come for the mind and the consciousness, if you look for Tibetan term like a namshe, and the same, you have to come for the source. Look at the source, how it explains, then you can understand much better. For my own experience, to understand the self, the Atma, I read the Bhagavad Gita and the other texts of the Hindu texts to understand it much better. So that's my own experience.
Thank you very much, Rinpoche. Mara, you wanted to?
Yeah, so a related observation. So first of all, I very much agree that in English too, I think the word consciousness means many things, and it tends to be used as if it means just one thing. But even in English, I think it's very important to actually break it down into different aspects. And for example, there's self-awareness, there's awareness of the world, there's affective and emotion, there's cognitive integration, and many aspects of it. And I think that's often neglected. But the specific thing that you just made me think now is that a very common definition you find in contemporary philosophy of mind draws on Thomas Nagel and says, something is conscious if it is like something to be that thing. And that uses this rather, I mean, I think of that as a non-definition because it's just substituting one word for a kind of peculiar English phrase, what it's like to be something. And so I often think to myself, and I've asked many people who are native speakers of different languages, I think that it probably doesn't translate that phrase terribly well, what it's like to be something, into other languages. And often I find that it doesn't translate well. So what about in Tibetan? Can you translate that definition into Tibetan? And, does it translate naturally? Something is conscious if it is like something to be that thing. Does that translate smoothly into Tibetan, or
maybe whether it translates smoothly or not? As I told, I'm not the translator.
Sorry, you're throwing all these translation questions.
But the one thing is very interesting when you look at the term like right now, the mind and the consciousness. So there's a very nice research that the person who speaks the 2 or 3 different languages, and when they according to what they speak, they're the way of the thinking that their personality will get changed. So that's the same thing that when I think the consciousness, when you talk about consciousness, what the image comes into my mind is totally different. When someone uses the Tibetan term, the namshe, imagine that my mind will be totally different. So that's why sometimes I will get myself a little bit of conflict with these 2 terms. So because as I asked you before, do the self have the consciousness or not? If you ask me this question in the English, I will say yes. If you ask this question in the Tibetan, I will say no. That depends. Because if I say the yes in the Tibetan, definitely they will debate with me. If the self is not a form, how can it have the consciousness?
If you ask me the question, I'll refuse to answer.
That depends on which language you ask me that question. So that depends on, then I will answer this.
Well,
Yeah.
I have a question for Mark,
Yes.
if we have time.
Yes.
So you talked about wind and breath, the
Yes.
importance of that. I know there's some recent research on respiration and
Yes.
the connection between respiration and neural processing, perception, cognition. Is that something that you would have in mind in terms of the idea of the breath?
Yes, totally. I think, but first of all, the mindfulness of the breath, anapanasati is like so central in Buddhism. And we will say that, if I'm correct, even the Buddha Shakyamuni is reported to have attained awakening through this practice, of course, then using it for vipassana. So from the Buddhist tradition, this exercise is deeply connected. And what I meant by life wisdom is actually life awakening to itself through mindfulness of the breath. And I mentioned those, practices, especially in the Tibetan tradition, that connects at this deeper level. So yes, there are exercises that seems to, according to traditional reports, to change states of cognition. Yeah, but maybe you want to say more about this modern research on respiration.
Well, just
breath. I
it
think really-
seems to show that if you modify
Yes.
your breathing,
Yes.
right, you're going to
Yes.
change your cognitive.
Oh yes, so then
life.
totally. So in the Tibetan traditions, I was referring very briefly to the pranayama, or lungjor. Yes, they do change cognition. So there are many techniques. Some of them use mindfulness of the breath without just like natural breath, but some of them are more active, but they're also more dangerous. So this is why generally they are not talked in all settings. But yes, definitely, like this pranayama is also very important in Tibetan tradition. Yes, although it is talked in different special settings. Yeah. So thank you very much. Now it is time to open the discussion to the floor and have an exchange with the audience here in Dharamsala.
Thank you so much, Marc-Henri, and thank you for the panel discussion. Now we are opening up the floor to you all to ask questions. I will have two helpers, Erin McCarthy in this part of the room and Park Krausen in that part of the room. So depending on where you are sitting, you will get a mic. So who would like to ask questions? Just raise your hand, and I would like to find an order, a good order. I see you, Robin, and someone else, maybe a monastic participant. We would really like to hear your perspectives as well. I would like to wait a little bit.
Can you use your hands to...
Yes, just use your hand who would like to ask a question. Any of the Geshe-las or Geshe-mas? Yes, please. You come first. And we are going to give you the mic. I'm going to give you mine for now until we get the other one. Thank you for volunteering. It's on.
Toma tele ane tela zombe ke chama lola ane trashi tele shuata ane tele nganzo chama tu sondu dolin choto batele pe gabochon so ane ngara ina tele da dolin chena banyam to nyam shuche koko junga tela ane pe mis gabochon so she ane ngetia di kadre sena tanda Rinus de Jemi Rinus Sunangda Ani Ripa Masung Chiche Rinus de Karinas Chiche Ani Tanda de Karsa Tangaranzo Tsenri ke Sheyon ke Karsenata Ayadye ke Nganzo da Chilo Kuntunjen de da Pemis Yapo da Peche Lumpa Peche Chadiora ane nganzu da de chilong tunchen yapo maybe go so nganzu chilo kan tunchen yapo chumbi na nganzu le kange meb ji chagre santa ria mancha ke da yabre ina job na sinchi pachi chumeb so na ji tando senki kange de cherun ro ni so na ji do ane tela ta karsana ngarang tu se karsana pachi nampi chunle ta Tucson mambo jibi juri nalo le da nampe shung ki nalo ki sung shanjo te nyamlen tsushi tu je tu bi na nganzu senki kange ma che ji an se tu gi abdawo ji tu se ta susole nyonso se na mindu ta lo mambo rin le na che jang pe juri nalo le ta kodo se na mindu te ne chile song ane mamba ane ta chenri se di pe mi si shenyo ki chanchen pemis yapo chadiore ani chizole pento ha saya ja chembo je thunye tanjua ta thunye chadiore ani chenri ke thone ani mau bangan so zombulin tela sengi shide te atola ani karsana tholang tanda ta kandinda jna tenga kandinda jna ya nas mau pa kandike nayak cheshi ya nas otitiati.
So I'll translate for her. She was saying that it's a great privilege for her and joy to be able to participate in this mind and life dialogue, and she wanted to thank everybody. And her question is that there has been a kind of an assumption on the part of human societies that initially when we are struggling with basic necessities, so our effort goes to seeking improving material conditions. And there is this assumption that as you improve your material conditions, then you're going to have a greater happiness. But in reality, that doesn't seem to be the case. You have another set of problems. And many of the problems tend to be more psychological and emotional, once you move beyond the immediate kind of physical needs. And she has found from her own personal experience of having studied Dharma for a long time that many of the mental resources that are offered in the Buddhist text and Buddhist teachings seem to really give you something that allows you to be more happy, more grounded, more resilient. And, clearly science is a very powerful, source of knowledge. Technology comes from science, and science is able to alleviate many sufferings. But her question is there a possibility that science can, in a way, help serve kind of the humanities, sort of promote mental well-being as the Buddhist texts are offering? Can you envision a time when science could be utilized more towards promotion of mental well-being so that people can gain genuine happiness? So that's the question.
Rinpoche, would you like to? So I would say first that I think this is what has happened in the mind and life dialogues, like especially when the cognitive sciences and the Buddhist, the contemplative traditions met, many programs, like mindfulness-based programs, mindfulness and compassion programs. This is how they emerge, and I think this is something that is ongoing, and this is something what we have to deepen. And maybe the new question for this dialogue is: can we design AI systems, and especially human-machine interface design or users' design experience in a way that can actually convey those qualities, and instead of, we translate like a liknu, there's this intelligent capacity that the systems also can enhance intelligence. It can dumb down the mind very, very powerfully if the systems are based on some forms of business profit, business models, but they could also enhance cognition. I think that's the hope. So now I want to turn to my colleagues is there a way that how we approach and design AI systems, they could enhance those qualities of the mind and make people stronger, better, more flourishing? Is this a possibility that you envision the space of possible minds?
Well, it's certainly a possibility that we would like to bring about. Yes. By we, I mean everybody.
Yes.
I think, to be honest, at the moment, the main concern is to make sure that we don't bring about the opposite effect with our technology. I think there is every possibility that it can be beneficial. To some extent, the sorts of AI that are being developed and commercialized these days are kind of general purpose technologies, and like any general purpose technology, they can be used for ill or for good. But what one hopes is that they do have that completely open-ended generality, and that there isn't built into them, things that will actually cause harm. And so that's the challenge: is to make sure that they don't cause harms in the way that perhaps social media has caused some harms, and of course the media is full of problems that are caused by AI, and so we want to try do our best to steer things in a more beneficial direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, Rinpoche, please.
If I heard the question very correctly, so it's about how can science can help the development of the humans, the happiness. So first thing is we have to know that what is a happiness. Right now, we get confused with happiness. If you go and ask the drunkard, what is a happiness? He will say the alcohol is happiness. If you go and ask the people, greedy people, money is happiness. If you go and lust, people who have the strong lust, woman is happiness. So what is the happiness? First, we have to understand what is happiness. Buddha said the one thing, I'm not so sure I can translate very well. So it means that the happiness is the absence of your negative thoughts. That is the happiness. So otherwise, whatever you can develop, if you run after the fame, money, I think that if you keep on the desire or attachment, I don't think you can find the ultimate happiness. So ultimate happiness will come when you can overcome all the negative thoughts. So that is a thing, and that I think that anyone can do. From my personal belief that everyone have that potential. So I always tell people that everyone can become the Buddha. Everyone can overcome the negative thoughts. That's what we call the Buddha nature. Everyone have it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sean wanted to add something about this important question.
I would just mention that there is a medical science and psychiatry
Yes, of course.
very much oriented towards medications, of course, especially in the U.S. But they are also now experimenting with chat boxes and in therapy, and a lot depends on how the chat boxes are designed. Some of them are designed with kind of a built-in trajectory. Somehow already pre-designed, pre-decided on what health is and where we should lead the patient. And I think that's part of that risk question, especially if the patient is not aware of what that trajectory is and has not, added or participated in deciding precisely what kind of therapy might work best. But it's a huge topic and a lot to talk about there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for this question. I saw Robin's hand, and so you will be next after Robin. So Robin first, and then you will be the next one.
Thank you for a wonderful conversation. So I want to just explore a bit more of these threads between consciousness and intelligence. And I love the intention of defining consciousness precisely. And I think of the work of Antonio Damasio, where he says a constituent part of consciousness is a feeling tone, a term that was used by you. Whereas AI is very much based on problem pattern, language development, and problem solving. So if in the future AI is to become conscious, do you think it's ever possible for AI to have a feeling tone? And if it doesn't have a feeling tone, what might be the ethical concerns that might arise in the future of this AI world?
It's a big question, Mary.
Yeah. So first of all, let me just take a little bit of issue at this phrase that of AI becoming conscious, because it sort of makes it sound as if it somehow does it by itself, and so I guess the question is if we make AI that we want to describe in that kind of way in the future. So going back to the point that consciousness, even in English, has many kind of connotations and many aspects to it. So I think we can break it down into, I mentioned earlier on, awareness of the world, perceptual awareness of the world, self-awareness, which itself can break down into bodily self-awareness and awareness of our internal stream of consciousness, for example, and affective, being aware of our sort of sensations and or of our valenced states of emotions. So we can break it down in that kind of way, and of course that all comes as a package in a human. But we can imagine building AI where we're kind of inclined to use the phrase self-awareness, maybe in a certain sense, awareness of the world. I mean, even my robot vacuum cleaner, you can say it has a kind of awareness of the world. You're sort of, you're sort of stretching the term a little bit, but I remember I was talking about adapting the language of consciousness. So you can imagine using those two terms, but I would hesitate to use. It's difficult for me to imagine using sort of affective terminology in a context that is not embodied. So to my mind, sort of embodiment is really kind of crucial there. And just lately, alluding to this sort of ethical dimension that you were brought up. So people are starting to talk about AI welfare, right? So this is a term that you see sometimes. And the people who talk about that aren't necessarily referring to things that exist now, but that might exist in the near future. And that term welfare just doesn't seem right to me to apply to anything that we're building now or in the near future, because welfare, if we think about animal welfare, we're thinking of the biological needs of an animal, sort of shelter, not having disease, having food, and so on. So I don't think the term welfare is the right one to apply to anything we can imagine building in the near future. And if it looked like we were going to build something to which that term really did apply, I think we should maybe hesitate about whether to build it at all.
Thank you very much. Maybe I just want to add one more thing. So when we talk about consciousness, this is more your field, but this field distinguishes two types of consciousness, basically access consciousness, that is basically the capacity to treat and synthesize information. And if we use that definition, then AI is already conscious. It is treating information. But then there is phenomenal consciousness, which is this feeling tone and even some deeper level of self-awareness, but even some level of metacognition. Now we have our systems that are already somehow have some metacognitive, like self-regulation mechanisms. So this is a huge topic, right?
Yeah, add the one more thing on that. The AI, from the Buddhist perspective, AI cannot become the conscious. To become the conscious, it should have the feeling. So we should ask the AI the one question: how do you feel being as an AI? So this question will clarify, I think, clarify point. For the Buddhist perspective, to become the conscious, you need a feeling. To need a feeling of there are lots of difference of the feeling of the joy, sadness, fear, all this, the feeling. So I don't think that they have feeling of the joy or sad. So that's why the AI cannot become the conscious from Buddhist perspective.
Thank you. I saw Geshe-la, and then you will be the next one over there. And I know Richie would like to make a comment, probably. Yeah.
Thank you so much for giving us opportunity to ask questions. My first question is, what actually AI is? I'm just curious. I want to know, what is AI? Is it a form? Is it some kind of a form? It is some kind of like formless. Some of you talk about it is some kind of like consciousness. According to in Buddhism philosophy, if it is a consciousness, then it must be formless. But sometimes it's talk about some kind of like wave or like a computer or something like that. So I want to know what actually AI is. That's my first question. And the second question is...
shall we answer the first?
Okay.
If you don't mind, then we'll come back to you, yeah? Is this okay? Yeah, maybe. Shall I ask you?
Okay. So as was emphasized in the introductory part, and I emphasized at the beginning of my talk, it is an ambiguous term that refers to many different kinds of things. So I could give a whole lecture to answer that question, and it would start with thinking about how the term was introduced in 1956 by John McCarthy and what he meant by the term, and you could start talking about that. But then how the whole field then developed, and then the many different kinds of computer program that were called AI, and they're all very different. And as Emily Bender is going to emphasize later on in the meeting, it's a contested term altogether. So I think the best that we can do when talking about particular questions is to identify particular kinds of AI and ask those questions in respect of particular kinds of AI. So for my part, I very often do exactly that. So in my talk, I was keen to emphasize that I was talking about large language models and chatbots and so on for the question that I was addressing there, I guess. So it is an ambiguous term, yeah.
And there was...
Next question, please. And if you can address one of the panelists who you asked the question from, maybe.
Anyone
Okay.
can answer my question? Sure. Okay.
Sure, that's fine.
My second question will be, AI is some kind of like very amazing thing. When I heard about you, your talk, so it can make so many wonderful things. So many creations which we never ever had before. But I'm a little bit concerned about the negative sides of the development of AI. Can we turn it, or can we teach or give a training, morality, some kind of like usually we call love, compassion, to AI? If we could do that, then it will be very helpful for our society. Because we created this wonderful creation. If it's not beneficial for our human society, this world, why it is important to create it, to improve it? So this I'm curious. Can AI control itself, or it must be controlled by someone?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
That
Geshe-la.
is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think
Thank you, Geshe-la.
this is a huge question that is very related to what is called the value alignment problem, and it will be really developed and discussed in the ethics session. So I will keep that very, very important question. But maybe just saying that, of course, we want to align our machines or AI systems with values, but we need in the first place as humans to be aligned, and we don't necessarily are completely clear about our own values. But I will keep that very important question for the ethics session. Yeah. Richie.
Over there, and then Richie after that, and then Geshe-la over here. So please.
First of all, I like Geshe-la's questions. I think they hit the nail on the head, right? So, Murray, this is kind of directed at you, but everyone. I would like to really, I hope through the course of these dialogues, get into the nuts and bolts, conceptually at least, around what is AI. Because I have real concerns. Right, I run an AI company. I'm not sure we should be building AI, seriously. And yet the genie's already out, we're not going to put it back in. So it's incumbent upon those who have a sense of ethical compass to do the best we can to build advanced intelligence systems that instantiate ethical compute and outcomes, right? But what AI is and how we build it is not peripheral, it's foundational to whether this is ethical or not. So I think what Geshe-la was asking is, what is AI? I'm very much with you. There are AIs plural, right? There are AIs that are symbolic, non-symbolic, entangled, non-entangled. And I think if we can pull out some of that nuance, it would actually be not peripheral, but central and essential to deepening this dialogue. Because if you can't see in an AI, if there is no transparency, from my point of view, there's no substrate for AI safety or alignment. If you can't create AI systems that learn on sparse and disorganized data, if you can't create AIs that create latent spaces and world models, true high-bar Lacanian world models, et cetera, so my question is a general one, which is, I wonder if you might just take a minute or two to kind of tease out a little bit of these structural pieces around the different types of algorithms in AI world, the different types of physical substrates upon which they're built at a high level so that we can give some dimensionality and get away from AI to AIs, AGI to AGIs, ASI to ASIs, plural, because they're going to be radically different.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, I feel you're hearing too much from me, and now you've invited me to give a whole talk. So what do you want to do about that?
But maybe, as you kindly suggested, maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, we've been talking about chatbots. So maybe we can start by picking out a very different kind of, well, not so very different, but a different kind of AI system. And I certainly don't want to sit here as, certainly not sitting here as any kind of representative of DeepMind or Google, but AlphaFold, I think, is a good example of a very different kind of AI system. So it doesn't talk, it doesn't create images, it does use machine learning, but its job is to solve the protein folding problem. So which is of enormous, value and potential benefit to humanity for designing new drugs, for example. Now, the underlying technology of AlphaFold is artificial neural networks that are trained in a way that is not dissimilar to the way that chatbots or large language models are trained, but it has a very, very different application and is very different in many ways. So that's one very simple example of something very different. Then sticking, I'm afraid, with DeepMind examples, we can think of something like AlphaGo, which was the program that defeated Lee Sedol, one of the world's great Go players, in 2016, I think it was. And again, that was trained on the underlying technology is kind of similar. It's a neural network that is trained using deep learning techniques, but it does a very, very different thing. And all it does is play Go, right? And similarly, all AlphaFold does is solve the protein folding problem. Now, things like ChatGPT are a bit more general purpose, and so that's very interesting. Now, let's just go back, though, a couple of decades. So if we go back a couple of decades, then the most kind of commercial thing that was called AI were expert systems. And expert systems were designed on a completely different technology. So it was all rule-based, following through rules and using reasoning and logic in order, for example, to do, say, medical diagnosis or fault diagnosis of a photocopier or something. So it would all be about trying to encode human expertise in some specific domain as a set of rules, and then you'd sort of follow through, logically to diagnose some problem, say. So that's again was called AI, but it's a very, very different kind of underlying technology that was used. Now, what's in common to all of these things? Well, when John McCarthy introduced the term in 1956, then I can't remember his exact definition, but he was interested in trying to replicate in a machine, and then there's a list of various things like reasoning, planning, learning, and so on. So the kinds of categories that you would find in cognitive psychology that he wanted to replicate in machine form. So that was at the inauguration of the field. So in a sense, we can find the echo of that definition inflected in all kinds of different ways in all of these different exemplars of AI. So does that help?
Wonderful, thank you.
Luckily, we have 3 more days to explore this
yes,
very question.
yes.
And further sessions will dive deeper into this question and the other questions that were raised. So it's not one session to solve everything and to answer all the questions. And I also want to mention that if your question is not answered properly, there is this box here in front on the stage, and you can always write your question here and put it in the box, and we will revisit them during the week. And now I would like to invite Richie and maybe Geshe-la, there was a Geshe-la here. After that, yes, and we will finish the session after that. First.
Okay. Thank you all so much. It was a great session. I want to bring into the room a question that His Holiness has asked us many, many times at many prior Mind and Life meetings, and then to articulate a specific theme that this question raises that hasn't yet been raised. And the question His Holiness has continually asked us when we have convened around neuroscience and Buddhism is about the issue of non-conceptual mental activity. And he would always ask about what are the neural correlates of non-conceptual mental activity. And Marc-Henri, you alluded to this a little bit in your presentation. But I think it's really important to allow this question to bother us when we think about AI, and to remind us how vast the range of human intelligences are, and really how extraordinarily narrow even the amazing range of artificial intelligences are with respect to what we can see in human intelligence. And this raises the issue of the experience of those who are designing artificial intelligence systems. And so the recognition of the nature of mind that you were describing, Marc-Henri, and the experiential recognition of non-conceptual mental activity is perhaps a prerequisite for thinking about systems that may actually instantiate that kind of mental activity. And it raises the issue of the relative myopic training of those who are actually designing these systems. And, you know, in science, we sometimes say research is me-search. I wonder at some point over the next few days if we can perhaps envision a more comprehensive curriculum, a training program for those who are actually thinking about these systems in order to broaden their horizons. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Richie. And actually, this is exactly what I meant by a contemplative turn in AI, but thank you so much for phrasing it so clearly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richie. And then
Okay.
Rinpoche.
Hello. My name is Molang. Yeah, a few years ago, we had to work on the artificial intelligence. Then right now we totally at 18 billion tokens at the Tibetan source, turned into AI, and turned into the GIMA 3 at the 12 billion parameters. So right now the result is this AI model is look like Tibetan people. Then the answering, reasoning, everything. Then also it is very compassionate because the source or the 80% source at the Tibetan source. So right now the big LLMs look like ChatGPT or Gemini's. They have billions or trillions of tokens turned into the AI, but they all source turned into the mission. So what happened at the LLM is very different. So how can we make the compassionate or ethnic to do the control of the AI? Yeah, that is my first question. Then otherwise is we can make it foundationally the change the ethically, but it is a very different way. Right now our AI as a model or algorithms or the foundation AI is very they understand just that we call consciousness or mind. I don't know in the exactly in English terms. Then we call namshi or rigpa. The rigpa mean is as a two aspects. One is knowing or understanding. Otherwise is as lightening or little bit at moving. It's look like one example. You some things put in the nest, then you figure out they automatically the different related changing the things. As look like as lightning. As that mean is at the rigpa is the moving something. Then so our understanding, how can we understand it? That is moving something as look like neural network or connect with the patterns, right? As look like that. So also, yeah, we can make it consciously or emotionally. I think it is possible, but we need or not, it is other topics. So if we need the consciousness or to look like same human, then we must change the foundation of the AI the concepts. Yeah. So I many to test or researches. How can we to do it a different and also ethic? Then also ethics is very different. So I question how you the research or what is your resource? Please tell me. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, I will wrap up quite simply. I think your first question, again, if I rephrase it correctly, is about encoding human values into AI systems. And again, this is something that will be discussed in many, many ways. And maybe to conclude this first session on minds, I may say, like echoing which is very important comment, that first we may have to start with the minds of designers. That could be a way to potentially program better AI systems. So maybe if you agree, Gabor, we will conclude here the first session.
Yes, and we are going to address this question
Yes,
that
yes.
Geshe-Mon Lam
So thank you
mentioned
very much.
later in the sessions.
Thank you very much, Sean, Rinpoche, and Murray. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.